Welcome to Random Flyer, the podcast that brings you the true stories of New Zealand's airline history. Today, we're looking at the Tasman Empire Airways Limited flying boats. These were the planes that launched New Zealand's first international airline. Most were scrapped, 2 remain preserved, and 1 was shot at by an Allied fighter while carrying a member of the New Zealand government during the Second World War. These are their stories. TEAL operated 12 flying boats in all, 2 short S-30 Mark IV New Zealand Empire flying boats, 4 S-25 Sandringham Mark IVs, and 5 Mark IV and Mark III S-45 Solents. The Empires entered service in 1940, flying with TEAL for 7 years. The Sandringhams during 1946 and 1947, serving for 2 to 4 years, and the Solents in 1949 and 1951, serving for 5 or 6 years until the introduction of the DC-6 in 1954, although one stayed on until September 1960, ending 20 years of TEAL flying boat service. The Short Empire flying boat was designed and developed in the 1930s by Short Brothers for Imperial Airways to satisfy the government contract to provide an airmail service through the British Empire. The routes were expected to be from the UK to South Africa, Singapore, Australia, and eventually through to New Zealand. The type came to life in 1935 as the S-23 with an Imperial Airways order for 28 flying boats of unspecified design, but would weigh 18 tonnes, capable of carrying 3,720 kilo payload, for 435 nautical miles at a time, and at a speed of at least 113 knots against a headwind of 35 knots. Fuel consumption was to be not more than 585 litres per hour. A total of 42 Empire flying boats were eventually built between 1937 and 1940, and the type was retired in 1947. The TEAL versions were known as the S-30 Mark II and Mark IV New Zealand class and were development of the original S-23, but were fitted with 4 619 kilowatt Bristol Perseus 12C sleeve valve engines in the place of the Pegasus engines. The new sleeve valve arrangement provided better gas flow in and out of the cylinder, providing higher compression with less tendency for N-gas auto-ignition, otherwise known as detonation. The maximum takeoff weight increased from 18,370 kilos to 21,000 kilos, with a fuel capacity increase to 8,000 litres, giving it an endurance of over 13 hours at a still air range of 1,940 nautical miles, cruising at 140 knots. Over the years, the TEAL Empires were fitted with between 10 and 19 passenger seats. TEAL had originally been allocated 3 such flying boats, construction numbers 884, 885 and 886. But 884 and 885, which had to become Zulu Kilo Alpha Mike Alpha and Zulu Kilo Alpha Mike Bravo respectively, had been retained temporarily by Imperial Airways while the organisational structure of TEAL was finalised. During Imperial service in 1939, Mike Bravo was badly damaged after running aground at Basra and took 3 months to repair, while its forward hull was rebuilt. In the meantime, war had been declared and the machine was retained in Imperial service to satisfy the increasingly urgent need for long-range planes for the important wartime routes. Mike Charlie had to be renamed as Mike Alpha as, on the day of the New Zealand press visit, the original Mike Alpha and Mike Bravo were still in service with Imperial. Because the New Zealand authorities wanted a more nationally significant combination, Zulu Kilo Alpha Mike Alpha, Aotearoa, to represent the new airline in the publicity, construction number 886, which was to be Mike Charlie, was hurriedly renamed and repainted as Mike Alpha, and the artefact of this can be seen in the different typefaces used on the 2-letter A's to correct the registration on the rear of the aircraft. It departed Britain for New Zealand in August 1939 as Mike Alpha, while the displaced 884 was later released from Imperial Airways and completed the identity swap, becoming Mike Charlie. The Empire flying boats were developed contemporaneously with the longer-range military short S-25 Sunderland. During and after the Second World War, many Sunderlands were converted to a civilian version, the Sandringham S-25, and this became the second of 3 flying boat types used by TEAL. TEAL had the 30-seat Mark IV Sandringham, which was fitted with 4 Pratt & Whitney R1830-92C twin Wasp engines at 890 kilowatts each. The Twin Wasp is an American air-cooled radial aircraft engine. It has 14 cylinders arranged in 2 rows of 7, and it was also fitted to the 4-engine consolidated B-24 Liberator heavy bomber and the twin-engine Douglas DC-3. More than 170,000 units were made, making it the most produced aviation engine in history. It was unusual for a British airplane type to be fitted with an American engine, but the single-row Perseus engine's power output had become limiting to the Sunderland, which was becoming progressively heavier with added equipment, and the Twin Wasp was more powerful and an easy conversion to make. The short S-45 Solent Mark IV flying boat, the third type of flying boat to be operated by TEAL, was a civilian derivative of the enhanced Seaford flying boat, and were powered by 4 1,520 kilowatt Bristol Hercules 733 engines. The Bristol Hercules engine was a 14-cylinder radial engine and was essentially a two-row version of the Perseus sleeve valve engine. It was the most numerous sleeve valve engine made, with over 57,000 being produced. The Solents had a takeoff weight of 36,740 kilos and a still air range of 2,600 nautical miles and was configured to seat 44 passengers. The Solent's origins can be traced to the attempt to give the Sunderland more power. As mentioned earlier, the existing Sunderlands could be upgraded relatively easily with American Pratt & Whitney twin-wasp engines, and the result being called the Sunderland Mark V. Fitting the more powerful British Bristol Hercules engines required much more extensive redesign, and by the time Short had enlarged and strengthened the aircraft, altered its hull, and installed the new engines, it had become sufficiently different to receive a new name, the Short Seaford. The post-war Solent was then developed from the Seaford design, adapting the larger Hercules-powered flying boat into a civilian airliner. Zulu Kilo Alpha Mike Alpha was a short S-30 Mark IV New Zealand Empire flying boat and was built at the Short Brothers facility in Rochester, Kent, and first flown there on 9 May 1939 as Zulu Kilo Alpha Mike Charlie. It had been ordered by Imperial Airways in October 1937 as part of the Empire Air Mail scheme and was one of 3 short S-30s earmarked for operation between Australia and New Zealand. The aircraft was built as TEAL's third aircraft, Mike Charlie, and was launched as such. As the organisational structure of TEAL had not been agreed upon at this time, the aircraft was stored by Imperial Airways at Hythe until preparation for delivery to TEAL. It arrived in Auckland on the completion of its delivery flight on Monday, 28 August 1939. During the delivery flight, Mike Alpha encountered a vulture over India on 19 August. The bird hit the windscreen at a closing speed of 170 knots, but did not damage the aircraft. Following its arrival in Auckland, the plane carried out a number of survey flights, Suva and Sydney in September 1939, and Suva, Tonga, Auckland on October 21 to 23, 1939, all commercial Auckland to Sydney service on Tuesday, 30 April 1940. During service with TEAL, Mike Alpha was struck by lightning while over the Tasman Sea in June 1941, causing a fire on the control deck. In 1942, it, along with Mike Charlie, was fitted with Hamilton Standard full feathering propellers, being the only 2 of the type being fitted with such propellers. Mike Alpha flew the final Sydney to Auckland Empire flying boat service on Friday, 7 November 1947, and was withdrawn from use and stored in Hobsonville alongside Mike Charlie, which had been retired 6 months previously. Mike Alpha floated on a mooring, while Mike Charlie was hauled ashore and stripped of its engines and parts. In July 1948, it was decided that Mike Alpha would be converted into a tea room at Mission Bay in Auckland by Carter and Maccabi engineers of Onehunga, after being granted permission by the City Council to do so. The conditions of the grant were that it be in place for no more than 2 years, and it not be used for living in. A seemingly unusual stipulation, but one perhaps included because of the 50 to 60 inquiries to TEAL for turning them into housing for homeless people. On Friday, 6 August 1948, Mike Alpha was fast taxied from Hobsonville to Mission Bay, and it's rumoured to have become airborne for a short distance whilst off North Head. On arriving in Mission Bay, as the tide had retreated, making beaching unfeasible, the aircraft was towed to Mechanics Bay and returned to Mission Bay on Sunday, 8 August 1948 for a second attempt. This time, the plane was successfully beached on the site of the old Walsh Brothers Flying School in Mission Bay mid-morning and towed across Tamaki Drive to its destination. Mike Alpha remained in place and, according to council regulations, was scrapped on site by Dermot and Lynn Scrap Merchants on October 1950, aged 14 years. Zulu Kilo Alpha Mike Charlie was a short S-30 Mark IV New Zealand Empire flying boat and was built at Short Brothers at Rochester, Kent, launched there on 2 March 1939. It had been ordered by Imperial Airways in October 1937 and was one of 3 short S-30s earmarked for Empire Air Mail scheme operations between Sydney and Auckland. Following the launch, the plane sat at Rochester for several weeks, awaiting engines and parts, and first flew on 20 April 1939. Since the organisational structure of TEAL had not been agreed upon at the time, the aircraft was taken over by Imperial Airways and flown as Golf Alpha Charlie Yankee, as a replacement for another flying boat which had sunk on 19 June 1939 following a refuelling fire. While Imperial Airways were not prepared to release this aircraft to TEAL until it had received its replacement machine, TEAL itself could not commence services at all until it had received its second aircraft, so after political pressure was applied to Imperial Airways, the aircraft was released in November 1939. Following its release, the machine was sent for overhaul by Short Brothers, where the engines were replaced and all control services were recovered. Ownership was formally transferred to TEAL on 13 March 1940, and the plane departed Southampton for its delivery flight to New Zealand, arriving in Auckland on Wednesday, 3 April 1940, 8 months after Mike Alpha, and was named Aotearoa. Once in Auckland, Mike Charlie operated TEAL's second return service from Sydney to Auckland on Monday, 6 May 1940. During service with TEAL on January 24, 1942, the plane was hit by machine gun fire from a Douglas Dauntless launched from the USS Enterprise. The plane was on a special flight returning from Honolulu to Auckland, carrying Minister of Finance Walter Nash. Due to wartime conditions, it was decided to operate the aircraft without any national insignia or markings, and whilst flying between Canton and Suva, the aircraft was intercepted by the Dauntless. Mistaking the unmarked aircraft for a Japanese machine, he made 3 machine gun passes at Aotearoa, hitting the plane with a round. On realising his error, the pilot carried out a visual inspection, waved farewell, and continued on his way. The bullet hole was located on inspection in Suva and was repaired on return to Auckland. Mike Charlie flew its final revenue service Sydney to Auckland on Thursday 12 June 1947 and is withdrawn from use and stored in Hobsonville, Auckland, where usable parts were removed. Following that, the plane was towed to Tamaki Estuary, where it was broken up into transportable sections and moved to the Onehunga scrapyard of Dermot Inland, where it was scrapped in September 1948, aged 11 years. Zulu Kilo Alpha Mike Bravo was a short S-25 Sandringham Mark IV Tasman class flying boat that was built as a military Sunderland Mark III in 1944 by Short Brothers at Rochester and was delivered to the Royal Air Force as Mike Lima 761 at Whig Bay in Scotland on Tuesday 7 March 1944. With the RAF, it went to No. 57 Maintenance Unit at Whig Bay and then to the RAF Coastal Reserve Division at Helensburgh, an administrative holding unit, used primarily during the Second World War to store, maintain and allocate surplus aircraft. But it did not see much action there. It then went to Short Brothers in Harland and Belfast for conversion to a Sunderland Mark V, including the upgrade from the 794 Bristol Pegasus 18 engines to the 895 kilowatt Pratt & Whitney R1830 twin Wasp engines in 1945, before being returned to No. 57 Maintenance Unit, and was released as surplus on Monday 18 March 1946. Following the RAF tenure, Mike Bravo was sent to Short Brothers Harland and was converted to an S-25 Sandringham Mark IV Tasman class flying boat for TEAL. The conversion included seating for 30 passengers. The aircraft was named RMA Tasman and was relaunched at Belfast and handed over to TEAL at Hythe in July. Mike Bravo arrived in Auckland on the completion of the delivery flight on Wednesday 17 July 1946 and entered service with the airline. Mike Bravo operated its final TEAL revenue service, Sydney to Auckland, on Wednesday 14 December 1949 after 2.5 years service with the airline. Following TEAL service, Mike Bravo was stored in Hobsonville and was sold to Qantas Empire Airways Limited in March 1950 as Victor Hotel Echo Bravo Whiskey. Qantas's Sandringham fleet served the island routes from Eastern Australia to New Caledonia, New Hebrides, Fiji, New Guinea, and on a smaller scale, Lord Howe Island. While in service with Qantas, Mike Bravo was damaged during a landing accident in Sydney in April 1951. The aircraft lost the float, and the wing was extensively damaged, but it was repaired and returned to service. However, the aircraft was damaged beyond repair at Port Vila, Vanuatu on 10 June 1951. Whilst taxiing for takeoff, the aircraft struck a coral reef in the harbour, puncturing the hull in several places. All passenger and crew were evacuated successfully as the aircraft settled in the water. It was raised but declared a write-off due to saltwater immersion and was later scuttled in a deeper part of the harbour, used as a diving attraction, age 7 years. Zulu Kilo Alpha Mike Delta was a short S-25 Sandringham Mark IV Tasman class flying boat, but was built as a Sunderland Mark III by Short Brothers in Harland and Belfast in 1944, delivered to the Royal Air Force in November as Juliet 255 at Whig Bay, first going to No. 57 Maintenance Unit in September 1944. It then went to No. 10 Squadron Royal Australian Air Force, hunting German submarines and escorting Atlantic convoys at Mountbatten near Plymouth in southern England from November 1944, before being returned to No. 57 Maintenance Unit in June 1945. Mike Delta was sent to Short Brothers in Harland and Belfast for conversion and engine upgrade to Sunderland Mark V in September 1945, and was released as surplus to requirements on Tuesday 9 April 1947. On release, Mike Delta was returned to Short Brothers in Harland to be converted to Sandringham Mark IV Tasman class for TEAL, and arrived in Auckland on the completion of the delivery flight on Monday 5 August 1946, operating its first Auckland-Sydney-Auckland service later that month. Mike Delta operated its final TEAL service on Monday 12 September 1949, and was stored in Hobsonville before being sold to Qantas Empire Airways in April the following year as Victor Hotel Echo Bravo X-Ray. In September 1951, while in service with Qantas, Mike Delta was damaged when it collided with the Department of Civil Aviation safety launch. Mike Delta was withdrawn from service with Qantas and sold to Ansett Flying Boat Services, registered to them as Victor Hotel Bravo Romeo Echo in December 1954. Mike Delta partially sank and was declared a write-off following a storm on Lord Howe Island on Wednesday, 3 July 1963. The airplane was moored but was washed ashore during the storm, causing damage to the starboard float. It was towed out to a new mooring, and staff weighed down the port wing in an attempt to relieve the strain on the starboard float and structure, but, unable to withstand the buffeting, the damaged starboard float collapsed, allowing that wing to sink into the water. It was towed ashore and declared a write-off the following day following a detailed inspection. The plane was stripped of useful parts and scuttled 5 kilometres offshore on December 1953, aged 19 years. Zulu Kilo, Alpha Mike Echo, was a short S-25 Sandringham Mark IV Tasman class flying boat, but was built as a Sunderland Mark III by Blackburn Aircraft of Dumbarton, Scotland in 1944 as part of a Ministry of Transport contract for 25 of the type. It was delivered as November Juliet 179 and went to 57 Maintenance Unit Wig Bay in June 1944 and then to Hampshire. The plane saw action with Norwegian No. 330 Squadron at Solent in Scotland from July 1944, with the squadron being staffed entirely by exiled Norwegian personnel and conducted anti-submarine patrols and convoy escorts over the North Atlantic and Norwegian coast. Following service with the Norwegians, Mike Echo was sent to Short Brothers in Harland for conversion to Sunderland Mark V in May 1945, before being returned to 57 Maintenance Unit, following conversion in July, and was then released 9 months later as being surplus to requirements in April 1946. Following RAF service, Mike Echo was sent back to Short Brothers in Harland for conversion for TEAL to Sandringham Mark IV Tasman class and arrived in Auckland on the completion of its delivery flight on Wednesday, 4 September 1946, flying its first Auckland-Sydney-Auckland service the following Wednesday. Mike Echo operated its final revenue service from Sydney to Auckland on Monday, 19 December 1949, and was withdrawn from use and stored in Hobsonville. It was test flown from Hobsonville and sold to Barrier Reef Airways in April the following year, and became the first of 2 TEAL Sandringhams to go to Barrier Reef Airways. Before purchase, Barrier Reef Airways had struck financial difficulties, and the owner, Stuart Middlemas, had turned to old friend Reginald Ansett for financial relief, and the funds were used to update the fleet with 2 of the TEAL Sandringhams. For Barrier Reef Airways, Mike Echo was overhauled and converted to seat 41 passengers, up from the original 30, entering the Australian Aircraft Register as Victor Hotel Bravo Romeo Delta on Monday, 12 March 1951. Ownership was transferred to Ansett Flying Boat Services Proprietary Limited, trading as Ansett Airways Flying Boat Division, following that company's buyout of the remaining Barrier Reef Airways ownership on 1 May 1952. During its time with Ansett Flying Boat Services, the aircraft was struck by a riverside coal transport barge on the Brisbane River on 11 July 1952. In October 1952, it sank overnight at its moorings on the Brisbane River after, it is suspected, it was struck by an unidentified boat, causing damage to the port float, causing flooding to the aircraft. The plane was towed to the Colmsey Slipway in Brisbane after being refloated, but declared a write-off on 4 November 1952 following a detailed inspection. Mike Echo was then sold to Pacific Clipper Enterprises of Gold Coast, who intended to convert it to a floating restaurant. But it sank without trace on Monday, 1 February 1954, when it was swamped by waves, being towed to its new Gold Coast location, and it was aged 10 years. Zulu Kilo, Alpha Mike Hotel, is a short S-25 Sandringham Mark IV Tasman class, but was built as a Sunderland Mark III at Short Brothers in Rochester in July 1943. It was part of a Ministry of Transport contract for 31 Sunderland Mark III aircraft and was delivered to the Royal Air Force's Juliet Mike 715 at Wig Bay, where it joined No. 1 Flying Boat Servicing Unit in July 1943 before being absorbed into No. 57 Maintenance Unit in January the following year. This aircraft was not used in operations and was transferred to Scottish Aviation's Flying Boat Modification Unit for conversion to Sunderland Mark V in April 1945, before being returned to No. 57 Maintenance Unit later on that year. Mike Hotel was sent to Short Brothers in Harland for conversion for TEAL to Sandringham Mark IV Tasman class in April 1947, and arrived in Auckland on completion of its delivery flight on Wednesday, 29 October 1947, operating its first revenue service Auckland to Sydney the following week. Mike Hotel flew its final revenue service, Sydney to Auckland, on Friday 16 December 1949, just 2 years after entering service, and was stored in Hobsonville. The following April 1950, the plane was ferried Auckland to Brisbane for sale to Barrier Reef Airways, becoming the second of 2 TEAL Sandringhams to go to that airline, and was registered with them as Victor Hotel Bravo Romeo Charlie. As with Mike Echo, Mike Hotel was overhauled for Barrier Reef Airways and converted to seat 41 passengers. It flew services from Brisbane to Lindeman Island, Daydream Island and Hayman Island, starting from 23 May 1950. Mike Hotel was withdrawn from use in January 1951 and went into storage in Brisbane until September 1952, and following a refit, it entered commercial service with Ansett flying boats in Sydney that December after the company had taken over Barrier Reef Airways. In 1969, Mike Hotel was repainted in the new Ansett Flying Boat Services Delta livery at Rose Bay in Sydney, and on 31 May 1974 operated the final scheduled flying boat service, Lord Howe Island, but maintained a token service until the island's airstrip was completed. While on such a mission on Sunday, 9 June 1974, the plane was damaged whilst moored overnight on the island. Temporary repairs were made on site before it was ferried to Sydney for permanent repairs. It was withdrawn from use by Ansett, returning from Lord Howe Island after picking up airline equipment in September 1974, and was sold to US Virgin Islands-based commuter airline Antilles Airboats. The aircraft was named Southern Cross and entered the United States Aircraft Register with a temporary registration November 158 Charlie, and departed Sydney on the ferry flight to the Virgin Islands on Thursday, 28 November 1974. In September 1978, the aircraft was stored at Grande, Puerto Rico, following the death of company president Captain Charles Blair. It was proposed that the airplane be sold to the Science Museum of England. It was returned to a serviceable condition, registered November 158 Charlie, in October 1980, and departed San Juan on the ferry flight to Ireland, arriving in Ireland on Friday, 24 October 1980. Mike Hotel was stored in Ireland for 3 months awaiting approval to enter the United Kingdom, and once approved, relaunched at Calshot and taxied to HMS Daedalus for storage in July 1981, and was finally purchased by the Science Museum for £85,000 the following year. The aircraft was partly dismantled and stored in a secure compound while maintenance was undertaken. In 1983, the airplane was loaned, gifted from 2019, to the Southampton Hall of Aviation, now known as Solent Sky, where a new museum building was constructed to house the aircraft, and it remains there on display, aged 83 years. Zulu Kilo Alpha Mike Lima was a short S-45 Solent Mark IV flying boat and was the first airplane ordered new by TEAL. The plane was built by Short Brothers in Harland and Belfast, Northern Ireland, and was first flown there on Wednesday, 20 April 1949. Although this plane should have been the first Solent to be delivered to TEAL, it became the last of the 4 aircraft flown out to New Zealand as, before being delivered to TEAL, Mike Lima was retained by Short Brothers for certification trials, testing and research. During hot weather trials at Khartoum in Sudan in 1949, porpoising on landing caused the loss of the port float. The crew had to make an immediate beaching to prevent the aircraft from capsizing, and it came to rest with the wing and float partially submerged. The plane was repaired on site and completed a further week of trials before returning to Belfast in August, where further repairs were made before being handed over to TEAL. Mike Lima arrived in Auckland on the completion of its delivery flight on Wednesday, 7 December 1949, and operated its first revenue service, Auckland to Sydney, on Wednesday, 28 December 1949, establishing a new record of 5 hours 37 minutes for that sector. During TEAL service, Mike Lima operated Tasman and South Pacific routes for the airline from 1949 until 1954, including transporting Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip from Suva to Lautoka, Tonga, Suva as part of the Royal Tour during 1953 and 1954. Mike Lima flew the final TEAL Wellington to Sydney flying boat service on Friday, 25 June 1954, and the final Sydney to Auckland service 2 days later, and was withdrawn from use and stored in Mechanics Bay. Following service with TEAL, Mike Lima was sold to Aquila Airways of London as Golf Alpha Oscar Bravo Lima, along with Mike November, departing Mechanics Bay for the ferry flight to England on Tuesday, 12 April 1955. Mike Lima flew for Aquila Airways on its routes to the Canary Islands, Madeira, and was partially subsidised by the government of Portugal. In 1958, when the Portuguese government declined to increase the subsidies for the route, Aquila announced it would cease operations from 1 October, and the routes were handed over to ARTOP, Portugal. However, ARTOP suspended services shortly after the sale due to financial problems, and, despite being delivered to the airline, Mike Lima did not enter service with them, and was abandoned on a beach on the River Tagus in Lisbon, being broken up for scrap there in 1971, age 22 years. Zulu Kilo Alpha Mike Mike was a short S-45A Solent Mark IV flying boat, ordered new by TEAL. The plane was built by Short Brothers in Harland and Belfast, Northern Ireland, and was first flown there in 1949. It arrived in Auckland on the completion of its delivery flight on Thursday, 29 September 1949, as the first of 5 Solents to be delivered to TEAL. It operated the inaugural Auckland to Sydney Solent service on Saturday, 19 November 1949, and the inaugural Wellington to Sydney Solent service on Tuesday, 3 October 1950. Whilst in Wellington later that month, Mike was struck by a 1.3 metre wave, tearing off a float and damaging a wing, but it was repaired in Wellington and returned to service. Further damage was sustained in October 1951 while landing in Evans Bay in Wellington, It was caught in a 55-mile-an-hour wind gust that ripped off the starboard float and stove in 3 windows. But once again, it was repaired in Wellington and returned to service. Mike was withdrawn from use by TEAL on Friday 28 May 1954 and stored in Auckland, but was badly damaged by fire during routine maintenance in early 1955. Scrapping commenced in Auckland on Tuesday 12 June 1956 with the aircraft age 7 years. Zulu Kilo Alpha Mike November was a short S-45A Solent Mark IV flying boat ordered new by TEAL. The plane was built by Short Brothers in Harland and Belfast and was first flown there in 1949. It arrived in Auckland on the completion of its delivery flight on Tuesday 18 October 1949 and was operated on TEAL's Tasman and South Pacific services for 5 years between 1949 and June 1954, when it was withdrawn from use and stored in Auckland. Following service with TEAL, Mike November was sold to Aquila Airlines Limited of London as Golf Alpha November Yankee India, along with Mike Lima, departing Mechanics Bay on the ferry flight to England on Monday 17 January 1955. Mike November flew for Aquila Airways on the routes to the Canary Islands, Madeira, and was partially subsidised by the government of Portugal. In 1958, when the Portuguese government declined to increase the subsidies for the route, Aquila announced it would cease operations and the routes were handed over on 27 October 1958 to Aotearoa, Portugal. However, Aotearoa suspended service shortly after the sale due to financial problems and Mike November did not enter service with them. Despite being delivered to the airline, Mike November did not enter service and was abandoned on a beach near the River Tagus in Lisbon, being broken up for scrap there in 1971, age 22 years. Zulu Kilo Alpha Mike Oscar is a short S-45A Solent Mark IV flying boat, ordered new by TEAL. The plane was built by Short Brothers in Harland and was first flown there in 1949. With the introduction of the Douglas DC-6 fleet in 1954, Mike Oscar was employed exclusively on the Coral route and was based in the Pacific Islands from 1954 until its retirement in 1960. Mike Oscar operated the final Coral route Solent service on Wednesday 14 September 1960, marking the end of the TEAL flying boat era. Following retirement, it was donated to Auckland's Museum of Transport and Technology, or MOTAT, and was placed in open storage near Hobsonville, but since the museum was unable to accept the plane at the time, it remained out in the open and was badly vandalised over the years. Finally, in May 1966, the engines were removed and it was towed down the harbour, up and across Meola Road. It was reassembled and stored in the open from the late 1960s, but serious restoration work was not commenced until early 1980s with the Solent Preservation Society Incorporated under the auspices of MOTAT. In 1989, a new hangar was built for it and it was moved inside and slowly restored, including having a new hangar built in 2011. Mike Oscar is now fully restored and on display at MOTAT, age 77 years. Zulu Kilo Alpha Mike Quebec was a short S-45A Solent Mark III flying boat that was built as a short S-45 Seaford Mark I by Short Brothers in Harland Seaplane Works in Rochester, Kent, and was issued to the Royal Air Force as November Juliet 204, allocated to 201 Squadron, Transport Command at Felixstowe for trials in April and May 1946. It was declared surplus to requirements by the Ministry of Supply, and passed to Short Brothers in Belfast, who converted it for BOAC to Solent Mark III configuration, with seating for 39 passengers, and emerged registered as Golf Alpha Kilo November Romeo, delivered to the airline in December 1947. It operated one return service to South Africa before being held in reserve as a backup aircraft until BOAC ceased all flyboat services in November 1950, and the plane was returned to the Ministry of Civil Aviation for storage. It was sold to TEAL at the end of May 1951, arriving in Auckland on the completion of its delivery flight on Saturday 15 September 1951. The plane was purchased to help extend the airline's South Pacific services between 1951 and 1954, and flew the first Coral route proving flight in November 1951. As the DC-6s started coming into service and the Solents were withdrawn, Mike Quebec was retained by the airline to provide support to Mike Oscar on the Coral route. On Friday, 19 October 1956, it flew its final TEAL Solent revenue service, a return flight from Auckland to the Chatham Islands, and was withdrawn from use and stored in Auckland before being broken up for scrap at Mechanics Bay in September 1957, aged 11 years.